We are a group of master's and PhD students. Mostly all of us are working on the Caucasus. The aim of our network is to bring together regional archaeological, anthropological, and historical debates and discuss current research carried out in the Caucasus. We are open to the fields of history, art history, anthropology, archaeology, medieval studies, literature, and historical linguistics, all related to the Caucasus and adjacent regions. Also want to note that the network is an inclusive and encouraging environment. We put strong emphasis on uniting and transcending national boundaries and enhancing dialogue between researchers. And very importantly to us, we provide a space for young scholars to showcase their research and thereby facilitate knowledge exchange among scholars and early career researchers. Yeah, over to you again, Maria.
Thank you, Gwen. So we'll kick off with our first speaker, Dr. Pavol, who is an archaeologist specialized in Aegean, Anatolian, and South Caucasian Bronze Age. He also has focused on digital archaeology. In 2009, he obtained his PhD in prehistory at the University of Tübingen in Germany and currently employed as a senior researcher at the Freie Universität Berlin. He worked for international field projects in Turkey and Syria. Since 2013, he co-directed the excavations of high mountainside Karnishsar in Armenia. So, Dr. Hnila, the floor is yours.
Hello to everyone, and thank you for the introduction and for the invitation. Although I'm speaking here today alone, I feel that I'm speaking on behalf of my two colleagues with whom I cooperate, with Arsene Bobokian from the Academy of Sciences in Yerevan and from Alessandra Gilibert, Ca' Foscari University in Venice. We are working on surveying and excavating the vishaps in Armenia since 2012. And I will present you the background and also our results of these studies. So for those of you who might not know what the vishaps are, we are speaking about stone stelae, which can be from 1.5 meters to more than 5 meters high. Originally, all of them were standing, and we divided them into three categories. So we have the Belus, Piscis, and Hybrida types. And if you ask what are the distinction criteria, so the Belus be defined as something which has a decoration in form of animal hide, as if it was draped on the stone, sometimes in combination with birds in antithetic position. Sometimes the head is placed on the top, sometimes it is like the skin or hide which is frontally in the center of the stele. Then the Piscis vishaps are in the shape of a fish, and we know that there are at least two different types of fish. One of them very big is the catfish, because it's very distinct in the iconography. And then we have the third type, which is Hybrida, which combines the iconography of both these stones. So one, it is a shape of the Belus, which is on the belly of a fish. So we have the stone in shape of a fish, but on the belly of the fish, we have the familiar iconography of the animal hide. We think it's a ram, but there are discussions if it is bull or ram or both. Why are they called vishaps? Actually, the name is to be translated as a dragon from Armenian, so that would be dragon stones, and they are named like this because when they were first excavated en masse at the beginning of the 20th century by Russian scientists Mar and Smirnov, then locally in the Gerama Mountains, the people there knew them under this name. So in Armenian, they were vishaps, in Kurdish and Turkish, they were ashdahas, but with all meanings dragons. And in the folk tradition and also with the mythology, there are some stories, that the dragons were dwelling in the mountains, and then sometimes in Armenian mythology, that the dragons can have the shape of a snake or of a fish. Even the story of the prophet Jonah from the Bible, where it was swallowed by the whale, it's in the early Armenian literature translated as a vishap. So even this kind of sea monster was a vishap. So probably they were called like dragon stones, monstrous stones, something in this sense. But it's possible that it's a fairly local development. We don't actually know if everywhere where these stones were occurring, they were called as vishaps, because the very first mentions in the literature from Georgia or from Turkey, they are referring to them as milk stones or simply as erected stones, standing stones, without specifications. But in the meantime, in the literature, at least in the scientific literature, since the publication of Mariam Smirnov, they are called under the name vishaps, and we continue to use this name because we find it useful. So either in the original form or in the translated form as the dragon stones. Since the publication of the Vishap in 1931, which was done in French, so it could have been perceived in the West, but surprisingly, it was quite forgotten. And I have to say, before I was told by Arsene about the existence of these stones, I never stumbled upon them in the literature. So they were fairly forgotten in the West for the long part, with some notable exceptions. Not so in Armenia. There were a lot of scholars trying to interpret them. A lot of work went to the iconography and into the interpretation of the vishaps. But as you can only see from this overview, you don't even have to read it all, because it's the main purpose of this is to show that there is no unity about the interpretation. So there are vastly varying opinions about what do they symbolize of different deities, or if it is totemic, or if some constellations of bull or fish. So really no unity about that. And this is something what is valid also for the dating. Before 1963, nearly all scientists thought that they must date to the first millennium BC, but then a secondary Urartian inscription was found on one of the bishops, and it was clear that it must be earlier. How earlier? It was still not clear. So it was proposed that it might be Middle Bronze Age, but some scientists, like Hanzadian, proposed no, it must be earlier. They start at least in 5th or 4th millennium BC. So this was the state of research when we started. So neither the name, nor the meaning, nor the date were really clear. And there was also no map of these stones, except a single one, which was with 2 of the dragon stones published for Aragats. But the others were not. So the first, our attempt was to try to localize where they come from. And we knew from the literature that there are concentrations in the Gerama Mountains, in Aragats in Armenia, then in the Vardenis in Armenia, and in Georgia, in Trialeti and Javaheti, and then in Turkey, close to Erzurum. But we wanted to know precisely where in the terrain they do occur. And so we went to the mountains and we tried to speak with the local pastoralists who were seasonally there for 3 months during the summer. It was not easy, because also the local names changed, the population changed. So the Turkish names, which were known from literature from the beginning of the 20th century, are not used today. So nobody really knew them, these names. But with the help of photographs, we could sometimes get the information, and some people were willing, others not. But during the years, we found out information about more than 100 of these stones in Armenia. And we documented them, measured them, and tried to figure out if there is any pattern in the placing, in the terrain. Very few of them were still standing. Well, still, probably they were re-erected at some point of time, as we could also figure out during our excavation that this happened. But most of them were found in the fallen position, usually still visible in the terrain, so they were rarely covered. What we found out is that the absolute majority of them occurs between 2,000 and 3,000 meters above the sea level. So you can see it in the dark gray area. Very few are in above 3,000 meters, maybe 2 or 3 of those stones, and some of them are lower than 2,000 meters. Exceptional cases, and sometimes it's also suspected that they were moved there, so it's not always the original position. What we observed on Aragats is an interesting situation that it seems as if vishaps were forming a belt on the southern slope of the mountains in the range between 2,400 and 2,800 meters, forming clusters or groups on the ridges of Aragats. Interestingly, however, the groups are not intervisible. So from one concentration, you cannot see the other. Although theoretically, it should be possible because the distance is not that far away. So if I look from the left group to the next one, I can see people there on the ridge, but I cannot see the vishaps. It is because they are placed in the concave meadows, which have smaller ridges on their sides, and they cause until the very last moment, until you stumble upon them, you cannot actually see them. And it's interesting. This is one of the first things that we observed, because this was a pattern that repeated itself in many places, not only on Aragats, but also in the Geram Mountains. We suspect that it's not because they wanted them to be invisible, but maybe because the main purpose of the placing in the terrain was to put them close to the water springs. And we tried to test this hypothesis because the places are very wet, usually with some springs and also with water courses. And we tested it with GIS. So we put the number of random points corresponding to the number of vishaps in the same landscape. And we were comparing it and trying to figure out how is it related with rivers, with lakes, and with the springs. And while the rivers and the lakes were indifferent, there was a big difference by the water spring. And actually we have much better correlation of vishaps than it should be expected on the base of random points. So it's twice the number of vishaps in the less than 1 kilometer from a water spring is double as what might be expected on base of the random points. We chose one of the sites on Aragats for excavation because we could not figure out more information from the survey, especially not about the dating of the stones, not about their meaning. So we chose this site called Karmir-Sar, which is almost 60 hectares big. It has a lot of water. It's a favorite place until today by the pastoralists. And we chose it also because it had the highest concentration of vishaps known so far. It was unknown previously, but we are speaking about at least 12 of these stones on this single site. We excavated almost all of them that could still be found unbroken or in situ. The contexts were different. Some of them were just laying around and there was no kind of construction close to them. Other had circles of loose stones close to them, and still others were placed in the middle of stone cromlechs. So this is something which was not really expected from us. We were hoping on a much more clearer and unified context that could tell us more about the use. It was not the case. In 3 of those contexts, we could find the pit where the vishaps were placed, and we dated the contents of this pit. So not always there was suitable material. We floated everything that was inside, but really there was usually some very small bits of charcoals. Nonetheless, we dated them, and they formed 2 groups. So we have a group which concentrates about 4000 BC or shortly before, and then we have a second group which is in the Middle Bronze Age. And this also caused discussions among us. Okay, so what is it? Is it that the one group is maybe residual or the other is intrusive, or do we have the secondary contexts here, which we think we really have in some of the stones, because they were reused and they are reused until today. So they have a long afterlife in this sense. So we were trying to figure it out in different ways, but then in 2019, we found what we think might be the decisive context, which was a bishop that was broken in several pieces, but one of the pieces was laying still close to its original base. Can you see my mouse actually, or not? Yeah, okay, great. So so this is the base of the bishop, and this is the broken part, and close to the bishop there's a concentration of stones, and actually there was kind of half circle which was probably continuing once here and there where it was destroyed, but then all this area was covered by bones. And so this is how we imagined it originally. So there is one piece missing still between the base and the broken part with the hole inside it, and there is one part missing on the top of it for sure. But the bones are also very specific, because I have to tell you that until we found this context in 9 years of excavations before, we found maybe 4 or 5 small fragments of highly calcified bones, nothing else, which is surprising, taking into consideration that this place was used by pastoralists for hundreds, if not thousands of years, who slaughtered their animals there. So we should, in theory, find a lot of animal bones. No, from no historical period that we excavated. This was the first exception, and really a lot of fragments which were heavily burned. So this was not a barbecue. The intensity of the fire was much higher than on purpose, and this fragmented the bones into this state. We dated the bones and we dated the charcoals between them, and they date to 4000 BC. So this is something which makes us believe, okay, so now we have this context, and since the stone is in some way related, is in the center of the structure, is related with the bones, is related with the other stones, so the vishap in this case should also date to 4000 BC. So this is more or less how we, at the moment, interpret this dating. And when we look on the orientation, so where the vishap was facing, we can see that either it is the summit of Mount Aragat, which is here in the background, or the spring in front of it, the green area which you see here. So it's the same orientation, so we can decide, is it either the spring or the mountain behind it. The mountain is hardly discernible, but it can be seen from this spot. So what are the conclusions and the remaining challenges? So we could perhaps tell the date now, which is most probably chalcolithic. We could see the location, which is focusing on high mountains and which has a high correlation with water springs. And we might have some association with pastoralists, because the bones that I showed you were animal bones. The preliminary archaeological evaluation points to sheep, goat, and cows. So pastoralists, yes, but still we cannot say if these were transhuman pastoralists that spent 3 months or 4 months each year there, or if these were people from the plain who came from a very specific feast or ritual to the mountain one time in a year. This is difficult to say because we don't have any associated settlement structure, not even a tent. Of course, it's interesting to know what was the climate, how we could, can this be in some way correlated with changes in climate? Is it maybe some kind of ritual response of the people on things going on in the plains, so like the society changes or climate changes? And this is something which we want to explore more. And vishaps is only one example of what was going on in the high mountains, and we will see the others even today. But since we also excavate since 2013 on Karmiasar, we have found traces of many other different periods, and in the meantime we are trying to get a picture of how, when it was used, and how the use evolved. So this is also my project, actually, what I'm working on in these years, founded by the German Research Foundation, which is dedicated to the high mountains as a cultural landscape, and inquiries the interaction between pastoralism, food, and climate change. Okay, I think this was all from my side. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm here for you if you have some questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hnila. It was really a fascinating presentation. Now I'm opening the floor for questions. If you have questions, please raise your hand or just unmute yourself. And yeah, Franziska, please.
Yes, thanks for this fascinating lecture. And it's good to see that there happened so much since I heard the last lecture of Arsen in Halle. I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago. So you made a big step forward. My question is, if you examine the climate right now, what is planned? Are you planning to take some drill cores and melting water places, or what are you gonna do to examine the climate? I know there is some pollen record from Lake Sevan and so on, but this does not help for high altitude.
Oh, actually, we also planned some cores closer to us, because high mountains as a habitat, let's say, it's very responsive to climate change. It can the vegetation zones can
Shift,
change very quickly, can shift very quickly. So I'm not so sure that we can really use the data from Sevan. Probably in some way, yes, but I would much more prefer to have data closer to us that reflect a smaller region. And we have some, because there are high mountain lakes in Aragat, and they were caught by an Armenian Russian team several years ago, and they are in process of being published. We are trying to locate even some wet areas closer to us to have several different zones sampled, so that we can tell it even more precisely how it was done and how it eventually changed. Because also with the level of the forest, with the tree line, there must have been some shifts today we are more than 1,000 meters above the tree line, or yeah, maybe the last trees. No, the last trees are less. Yeah, but still, it's more than 1,000 meters, and this is well, something usually between 2,300 and 2,400, maybe the last trees are, but the constant forest is below. And so it means everything that the people brought there in terms of firing wood need to be brought from far away. And this also limits the possibilities, what they can do, what not. And the climate for us is also interesting from the point of view of pastoralism, because there might be some epochs or some times where it was not possible to use the mountain. At least this is what our data now points to, that we have periods with no traces at all, and others when we have a lot of traces of settlement. So this is something which we hope to correlate with the climate.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have another question from Mariam, please.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for the nice lecture, Dr. Hnila. I have a question concerning these vishaps. When looking at them, I see beautiful, well, sort of iconography on these vishaps. And I was wondering, I traveled through Armenia in 2017 and saw a lot of kashkas, if there is some relationship between them, if someone has been looking at these vishaps, these iconography, this iconography on vishaps and the iconography on kashkas, if there are relationships between them.
In a way they are, but we need to define which sort. So there are some vishaps which were reused as kashkas, which evidently were vishaps before, which were kind of baptized. You can still recognize, for example, the shape of the animal head, but then the eyes and all the details were defaced, and there was a cross made on it. So this is something which was clearly a reuse of a stone which was already there, which more or less had the shape, but which had the wrong iconography. So they readapted it for the new use. And I think this was the case of most of them. So the iconography needed for the kashkas was, of course, the Christian one. So this was something which was different, which might have been disturbing. So in these cases, it was defaced. And we have it in several cases clearly observable that either it was completely defaced and then the stones were done, or like in 2 cases in Ubjur, where they left a little bit the raised parts of the animal head and then put the iconography, and then also added some other stuff on the kashkas, which was corresponding to the 11th or 12th century iconography of Christian motifs.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Another question from John.
Yes, I have a couple of suggestions, actually. These are just suggestions, so these are things to be chased down and wondered about. If I remember correctly, the pattern of a Chalcolithic presence and then sort of a gap and a Bronze Age practice is something that's common in the Caucasus, and this is related to a climate event. Okay, so you'll have to check that out. I'm remembering this. This is not actually my field, but anyway. Okay, what is my field? The suggestion has to do with your springs. And springs, at least in the parts of the Near East I know about, run in summer. They begin to overflow, in other words, in late spring, and they come in early summer. And now the relevance of that to you is that if this is, as one of the suggestions actually was, constellations, that if you're talking about Pisces and then Aries, that if you are referencing or reverencing or making an offering at that point, you are encouraging, if I'm right, about the springs to actually flow. And the other interesting thing, if you talk about the conversion into that, this is Easter season. So it would make sense for them to be Christianized.
In this sense, yeah. For the vishaps less, because they are still covered. These areas are covered with meters of snow in that period. So
okay, all right.
when they are seasonally available for maybe 3 or 4 months in a year, we can start working there at the end of June. Still at the beginning of June, there is the last snow. Then in October, again, it's already too late. So we need to take this seasonality into account when trying to interpret the vishaps, the original ones, like what the people could do with them and when. They were for sure only seasonally available.
So June to when was it?
June to late September, let's say. This is also what the local pastoralists use them now, the meadows in the high mountains in this area.
Okay, well, anyway, it was just a suggestion.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah. Next question from Mariam, please. We can't hear you, Janine.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I spent 1.5 years in Armenia a couple of years ago. What I noticed traveling in Armenia, especially around mountains like Mount Ararat and others, is that most of the places for the cult of Turkmenuk are around mountains. And I wanted to know whether in higher altitudes you found evidences of the Turkmenuk cult separate or together with the vishaps, which normally should be much older anyway.
Well, I'm not really sure if I understood your question, because like evidence of cult in the case of vishaps, it's the vishaps themselves. Otherwise, we don't have any traceable evidence that the people came there for doing anything like offering, sacrifice.
Oh, okay.
If they were, they were probably organic in matter. So maybe traces of meat, meals, libations, but this is something which we cannot really attest. Nothing that would really leave archaeological traces.
But you did not find any traces of Turkmenuk cult in high altitudes.
But what should it look like?
Turkmenuk is a cult which is called the Black Child, and some people say it's Christian, some people say it's pre-Christian, and my guess it's rather pre-Christian. I found 2 or 3 cults, 2 or 3 places with former temples of Turkmenuk with a sort of elevated stone that has been put down. And I was wondering whether usually Turkmenuk is a little representation of a small god or a small child. Now it's painted in black, maybe it was also in the past. And some churches have been built over the places of cult of Turkmenuk. But this cult is very specific because it surrounds mountains. So I was wondering whether during your field trips, you saw any evidences of a cult, of a sort of a small god with small altars.
Not in this form, no.
Not in this case.
There are some kind of cult places used even today,
Yeah,
but they are kind of syncretic Christian Yazidi small sanctuaries
yeah.
done by the local people that are not really churches, but
Uh-huh.
they build them, so they use different iconographies, even the Christians one and the Yazidis one in the same place, which
Yeah.
is interesting. But nothing of the sort what you described, that a stone in kind of sanctuary with an altar in front of it. Not now that anything that I could recall in this sense. I know that especially in Georgia, there are a lot of stones still standing. Many of them were even converted into khachkars and so on. But not even there. I'm not aware, really. I thank you for this information. I
Yeah.
will check
Well,
more on that, but nothing now from what I can recall. I don't have any.
Because
like
I was asking that because in a place called Horom, I found near a church, I mean a sort of chapel now it's a chapel with a Turkmanuk coat, and at the same time a standing stone, maybe a former vishaps that has been brought down. That was why I was asking the question. Maybe some of my Armenian friends or colleagues could add more information on that, but that's a big question mark anyway.
Vishap, it appears that it would take significant force to break the Vishap without uprooting it. Do you have a theory on how it was broken?
So can you still see my screen?
Yes.
Maybe I can go some slides back.
But you stopped sharing right now.
Oh, how come that? Is it there?
Yes, now we can see.
Yeah. So this is, I don't know if it is visible, but you can see maybe that the lower part of the stone is not so smoothed as the upper one. So somebody was doing chopping it away with other stones to cut it. I really don't know why they did it in this way, because it would have been easier to just throw it away, or it's 50 centimeters based, so we checked it. So it wouldn't have been that difficult to dig a hole on one part of the vishap and just to put it down on the other part. But for some reason they decided to cut it but chop it with other stones. So this was, if the question was like technical one, then with other stones. If they asked for the reason why, I don't know. It's, we observed there were different attitudes to these vishaps. Some of them were simply thrown down or fallen down. Others were completely defaced, that like every single part of the vishap was cut. Others were a little bit destroyed. This one was simply reused as a kind of grinding stone for cereals with the hole inside it. So there were different traces of afterlife, but not all of the reasons are still clear to us.
Thanks. So Dr. Knoll is an archaeologist working at the State Office for Heritage Management and Archaeology, Saxony-Anhalt. She is in charge of several research projects like excavations at the Wuthenge at Bömelte or the Golheim Network, focusing on traditional and future earth building in central Germany. By working on her PhD on Bronze and Iron Age wall paintings in Central Europe, she organized the fieldwork sessions to record petroglyphs in these unique islands in Armenia until 2018. So the floor is yours, Dr. Franziska.
Yeah, thank you. very much. I hope you see the full size slide.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, and can you see my pointer is visible as well? Okay, great. Then let's get started. So thanks, or thank you very much for organizing this session. I think it's central to bring people or projects together working more or less on the same theme. It's high altitudes in Armenia, but we are working on the other side, so more to the south. We moved to Munich, and today it's on landscape archaeology. And this is why I won't focus on the pictures themselves, but on their context and landscape. And the context is that this high altitude steppe was always used as summer pasture, as you can see here. I want to address the questions why and when the petroglyphs were made or left at the places where we find them today. And of course, who could have made them? Yeah, and it's of course not me alone or me by myself working there. We are several German and Armenian archaeologists, and this is because Saxony-Anhalt has a country partnership with Armenia, and both countries decided to cooperate on archaeological research and sites since 2009, and from 2012 to 2014 we had the possibility to conduct intensive surveys in this unique highlands, and that was founded by the country of Saxony-Anhalt and the Federal Ministry for Foreign Affairs. And yes, in 2018, we came back for a final short campaign. First of all, I have to apologize because it's not published so much right now, several small articles, and the monography is still pending. Actually, we're working on the catalog volumes. They should be published by and by, and hopefully the first one end of this year. Yeah, this unique rock art area is situated right here in the very southeast of Armenia, unfortunately very close to the border of Nagorno-Karabakh. And as you all know, the highlands and so the petroglyphs, I tried to map them here together. They range from Georgia over Armenia to Azerbaijan and as well to northwestern Iran. This unique site is, at least one of at least 7 major petroglyph areas, and this is why I'm here today. It's situated in a high alpine area, so we move in between 2,900 and 3,200 meters above sea level. It's a volcanic high steppe, and that means that we have an open landscape above the timberline, and it's so high that the timberline has probably always been lower. And we have very little human impact at all, and that can mean that the landscape is almost the same as in prehistoric times. So perfect conditions to survey and to record. In the winter month, that's what we discussed just a minute ago. There's plenty of snow, as you can see, and the area is as well here only accessible during end of June to end of September. The petroglyphs can be found where the geological setting provides the rocks that are needed for the rock art. In this case, Middle Pleistocene basalts. It's this, plain white or greenish area with blue dots. And they are, we have glacial impact later on, so we can identify the rocks quite well. The petroglyphs in Syunik spread over at least a total area of about 15 square kilometers. And what we did this year was a full record in these two big areas named after volcanoes nearby. Altogether over 2 square kilometers, and we tried to fill the gap in between and around with the surveys. And the most famous site you all might know is Uqtasar Lake, which is on record by an Armenian English team since 2009 and was examined by Ani Danielian in the frame of her PhD studies in Paris. Our aim was a full record of the landscape, including all artificial, so man-made features, petroglyphs, and the topographic values. And therefore, of course, we had a drone and created orthographical maps first. We split them up and used them for manual record in the scale of 1 to 100. And the result is a map with all petroglyphs, their direction, their declination, their relation to given natural and artificial features, as you can see here. Especially water is always very important feature. So the next step was the GIS modeling of the areas and of the surface. And these allowed us to create the least or low cost path that you can see on the left-hand side, or view shade analysis, or whatever you want, 3D visions and so on. Finally up to the rock art now. The petroglyphs packed in the dark patina of the basalt, as you can see here, of course reflect the artists as well as their environment. And we recorded about 3,500 petroglyphs with about 11,000 single depictions. And as you can see here, almost half of the figures are animals whose natural habitat was and still is the high steppe, whereas humans, that ones are underrepresented. They only have like 8%. So we have some predators like bears or snow leopards here and here, but we have mainly ibex. That's more than half of the 50% of the animals are ibex, which for sure was the subsistence base of the shepherd or the pastoralists who came there in the summer month, as well as some deer which were hunted. As we can see in the pictures, if this was real life, we don't know. We find no bones up to now. And we have cattle, mostly shown carrying a vehicle, or very rare, this one, they have a yoke with a plow. And here we have a four-wheeled car. And the funny thing is that the chart depictions usually are situated next to tracks that are passable for vehicles, like that one. You can see the petroglyph at the rim of a boulder stream. Yeah, here it is. And yeah, here you have the vehicle track. So you can go there with a chart. The gradient is less than 10%. And another close relation is the one to water. I will show you now some meltwater channels. So we don't have a lot of springs. We have meltwater channels and lakes. The channels are flooded only in very early summer when snow begins to smelt, and the lakes are carry water almost the whole summer, so you can bring your flocks there for watering. Yeah, I will show you this area. This is a picture where you can see the whole meltwater channel, or the brook bed when it was fallen dry. The artists or the pastoralists came there and may have rested there, because it's really full of petroglyphs. So you can see those white pigs. Each one is a petroglyph. Yeah, whereas shelters and heights always are situated not in the open landscape, but inside the boulder streams, and you can find in every place rapidly packed pictures. Yeah, but it's for sure not everything only about the bored shepherd. This is a theory that has been discussed for, I don't know, decades. But of course, people depict what they see or what they feed or what they work. But there is more. We have symbolic pattern like the dancers, we have several ground plans, and we have narrative structures and complex compositions like that ones that ends up into spiral. And of course there is it's like the next level, but I don't want to talk about interpretation right now. Yeah, the problem we have, of course, is the dating. There is no direct dating of rock varnish in this area so far. We tried a lot of. We don't have archaeological prehistoric finds so far, except of obsidian, which is hardly datable if you don't have the artifacts. But there are stylistic parallels, for example, with the ceramic vessels painted and packed for that style. And we have a Temenos antiquem, because this snake petroglyph is overlaid by this boulder stream, or the flow, which can geologically be dated into the 3rd millennium BC. But at least there are many packed symbols, such as wheel crosses, you can see here, that still were in use in early Christian times. This is the Church of Sicyon, so you can hardly take the symbols and date them. Of course, it's easier with recent or modern rock art. Here we have the Olympic Games in Moscow in 1980, and most of the inscriptions bear the year like 1968 and some rockets. So we have the space race, and that's easy to date, of course. Yeah, and if we now take the petroglyphs and the recent graffitis that goes back until the 1930s, well, we have the years, then you easily can see that they are spread over the same area. So that means we probably have the same land use in prehistoric times as well as in modern or recent times. Yeah, and if we take the low coast path again modeled in GIS, we have some very prominent waypoints like that one here. And especially in these places, you can find petroglyphs that, yeah, were packed or used 10, 5, 20 times. So it ranges from very old prehistoric ones up to 1955 and so on. Yeah. The petroglyphs can be closely connected to the land use, but the question is there more evidence for pastoralists presence? For example, we have remains of dry stone masonry. Of course, hard to date. We did some small trenches, but there is nothing organic to date. But here we have the dry stone masonry, which is quite flat, but it could be the remains of a round tent structure. And we have pens for the flock, still bearing a lot of crop marks. And this is what we know from another high altitude area, the Alps. It's an example from Mont Bigot. We have those bubble-like structures for the pens or cairns. And there we have as well the adequate petroglyph. We have not found this in Munich so far. Yeah, that leads to the question how long or how often the structures has been used for humans or animals. And yeah, we found in 2018 2 fresh campsites. I want to show you finally. Next to Melting Water Lake, which is right here in the center, and here we have the 2 campsites. And as you can see, what is left is after 1 year. They told us afterwards they have camped there in 2017. We have a pen and we have a fireplace and we have a tent. And I thought that it was, yeah, quite surprising that after 1 year or after 1 winter under snow, that these structures were still visible or fresh. Yeah, the tent can be recognized because you have here the stones with the cords that were used to fix the tent, and of course the rubbish that were left, unfortunately plastic. Yeah, but where do they come from, the shepherds or the pastoralists? And I have one idea for the calculated times, because the latest ones, the latest shepherds, they came from Goris, they told us, but in calculated times, they may have originated from Godetsor, which is located like here in the Vorotan Valley, which is about 1,500 meters above sea level. And French excavation revealed Ubaid vessels there, and vice versa, obsidian at Lake Urmia, right here, that belongs to the Munich deposits, right? Well, we have our petroglyphs. And so the idea is that the shepherds could have collected the obsidian in the highlands during the summer pasture, and then like trading it to Taos, maybe. And indeed, we had a closer look at Gorizor settlement, and in the surroundings, we found at this place some bed preserved, but they are here petroglyphs, as well with the ibex, of course, and in this case, a human figure. Yeah, so there's much to do, especially to publish it. And I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm sure there are many questions.
So thank you very much. I will take.
Ruben.
Hi. I will take this from this point, and thank you very much for the amazing presentation. It's always very nice to hear from the region where time is just frozen.
Yes.
And so the floor is open for further questions. And Andrew Kendall, please.
Yeah, hi, Franzi. Thanks for the talk, and nice to see you again. It's been a while since we met up in the highlands there. So I was interested, you mentioned that some of the inscriptions, some of the pictograms are of wild game, like ibex especially, but also deer. And my question would be then, are there other features in the landscape that suggest that people hunted these animals in sort of an organized fashion? Like, you know, there's lots of kites and things in the landscape there.
No, this is the only region where we don't, or up to now, we did not find any desert kites. I don't know why. We have a lot of like the bubble structured cairns or kraals or pens, or however you want to call them. So there are structures where you can put in your, not cattle, but I think sheep flocks or goat flocks or whatever. But we don't have these hunting structures. There is at least one petroglyph where we can think about of depicting maybe a desert kite, but there are better ones which are already published, but not it's unique.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next question is from Pavol.
Yeah, thank you also from my side. I have a question on the animals. So there are so many of them, like the ibex and so on. Could the people not be just hunters for some of these historical periods? So why pastoralists? I mean, in the period when we have the cards, yes. But for the earlier ones, like chalcolithics, because we are all the time trying to figure out how to prove pastoralism in our area. And by the way, there are also huge amounts of petroglyphs on Aragats. Nearly everywhere we go, there is much more than what is known officially. But still, so we were like trying to figure out, okay, so maybe there were some periods when the people started to use the mountains as for hunting, and then it starts for pastoralism. Like, can you distinguish in the iconography, like something which points to the domesticated animals?
Yes, there are petroglyphs where you can see a human like leading an ibex or a goat with a cord. And then we have kraal depictions. So there is a circle or rectangular feature with ibex inside. But of course we just don't have the archaeological evidence, and for an archaeologist that's quite not so nice, but I don't know why. So we had some trenches, and I tried micromorphology as well and so on, but just without any results. It's just because they told me, okay, if you have snow and every year and you have those high biotubation, then you don't have any chance to get some sediment dated or whatever. There is one kind of a settlement that has a cromlech with a bishop nearby. Lake Al is it called? So, but it's on the other side.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Arsene have been.
Yeah, we sent it to Arsene because we made a lot of drone pictures.
He went.
Yeah, I know he was there. Yeah, but this is lower, so we are not on these 3,000 meters levels. Yeah, the question is why should they go there? So how many ibex would you find there? Is it enough to hunt or not? I don't know. So maybe it's easier to bring them with you, and I'm sure that we know from archaeological data that they are domesticated in Chalcolithic times. So there is pretty much investigation of Anatolia, where they have the hilltop settlements, and they can as well see when they bring the cattle in. So first you only have sheep and goat, and then cattle arises with the beginning of the Bronze Age. Yeah, but these investigations can be made at the lower settlements, but unfortunately we don't have the bones up there.
And also in the depictions, so the horns that you find by the animals that are brought by the court are the big ones, and also in the ones that you have the pens or the depictions of some structures. They don't distinct from the wild animals. They use more or less the same iconography, or
yeah, it's the same, so you can't distinguish. So okay, sometimes we can see it's not an ibex, it's a mufflon, and it has these horns, but it's impossible to distinguish in between the ibex categories, or yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Further questions? I also wanted to ask a question about chariots connected to the one of Pavol. So firstly, I guess we can broadly, right, date the depiction of carts because at least, let's say,
of course,
2nd millennium BC, in my understanding, but maybe we will have another opinion. But also about pastoralists.
No, they come earlier. The four-wheeled car charts, you have them earlier. It starts around 3000 BC at least, but the how should I say, the two-wheeled chariots used for war and so on, that's 2nd millennium BC.
And I believe when people were if people were traveling to these highlands with chariots, or let's say four-wheeled carts, so presumably they had all their belongings and they were kind of prepared for some months, right? Because if you go there by car and it takes 2.5 hours from Goris or from Sisian, so back then it should have taken half a day or the entire day, right?
Yeah, it should. That's what we need as well today. So if you take the cars, the old cars or buses, then it takes you 2 hours up there. It's about 20 kilometers per hour or something. And yeah, the question always is, what do you take with you? I know these from the Alps, so we're discussing this for since long time, what people take with them if they go to summer pasture, or if they cross the Alps. And the thing is, of course, you won't find any Mediterranean amphora, ceramic amphora north of the Alps that was moved over the Alps. Of course, they take leather and textile and whatever to carry their stuff. Yeah, so, and maybe this is why we don't find any ceramics, or why we don't find any metal. So metal is precious. Even if it got broken, you will take it with you, and down in the settlement you will remelt it and create some new stuff. So the only thing that we really have is obsidian, but not the artifacts and not the cores, only the, how is it called, Abschlag.
Debris, I guess.
Yeah, should be. Yeah, so and they are not datable, but I wonder why we have not found some animal bones up to now, because people there need to eat something. But as I saw the latest bishop of Pavol, I thought about that maybe they burn it, they burn the bones. Maybe that's one explanation. Yeah, Pavol.
Just a reaction on the last remark. We were also struggling to find out why. So we did some analysis of the soil, like only the very basic one, to find out if it is acid, if it perhaps disintegrates the bone. It was not. It was quite,
there it's not as well. So the pH thing is okay. Yeah.
But I've heard this at different times. It's also sometimes in the Alps, but also by the Georgian colleagues working in Paravani Lake and in the vicinity at 2,200 meters. So it seems to be quite a normal phenomenon. So we are not exceptions. And when I asked some of the bone specialists, like anthropologists or even archaeologists, they think that what is wrong for the bones is if there are too big temperature differences and humidity differences. So this crumbles them, this makes them smaller, and at the end they dissolve. Because, and this is what is in our case true, because there can be temperatures, okay, in summer maybe 25 is the highest, but it can go to, I don't know, minus
25, yeah.
And this can be much harder. And then sometimes it's dry, then it is again wet. So these extreme differences are not good for bones. Yeah. And I think this probably explains why we don't find them, at least the organic ones. And the only form in which we find them is when they are extremely, but really extremely hard fired, but with a temperature that is not obtainable by normal barbecue.
Yeah.
This is something which they done on purpose. And there are some sites also in Mediterranean when the people were burning bones like combustible.
Yeah.
So if there are no alternatives, and in your case, as in ours, there was no firewood, this might explain why they sometimes fire or burn the bones, but the fire needs to be started by something else, because otherwise they don't burn well. So this is possibly the explanation what was happening with the bones and why they are missing.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. But what could be the fuel to get the fire started?
Well, now today they use the animal dung. They use it and it works quite well, but it only reaches low temperatures. So for example, the dung, it's completely fine for preparation of food, maybe even for some low level pottery. So something what we find from Middle Bronze Age, we were capable of doing it with dung, but it would not be enough to reach the temperatures that transformed our bones to this calcified state. They are so calcinated that it's not possible with the dung, at least we were told so. Maybe we should check maybe more, but we will.
Okay, thank you very much. Was there a question from Michel Gelenin, or I saw it wrong?
My question or my comment was that what I saw in the Caucasus is that regarding bones and carcasses, after the vultures, different vultures, Chornigriff, Beelgriff, had taken their share, or humans. Usually the Lammergeier, which is a vulture, would come in. The Lammergeier is a vulture specializing in bones. So usually they take the bones, take them away, drop them at some remote place, let the bones break and open, and they would eat the inside, the marrow inside of the bones. So this should not be discounted. There are many cases where the bones are taken away by the Lammergeier, taken away to another place and eaten in another place, not to be discounted.
Yeah, it's like they do it with the human bones in the Zoroastrian context.
Well,
That's
no,
almost the same.
No,
Yeah.
that's different. That's different. So usually, the shepherds know that. They know that the black vultures, the white vultures would come, eat different parts of the animal, and then the bones are taken care of by the Lammergeier. It's a regular feature. So this should not be discounted.
Oh, okay, just a comment to the comment. I agree it shouldn't be discounted, but but the reason is probably really deeper, because we don't have even the human bones that should have been buried in cromlechs. So we have some structures that look like graves. So according to our criteria, they would be called graves, but the anthropologists don't like to call them graves because there are no human bones. So they have been symbolic, or they simply disintegrated as all the other bones. So this is and we really excavated some contexts with that they also have all the stuff from the dead, that necklaces and so on, but no bones at all. So none of them.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Franziska, for the wonderful talk. We are really looking forward to hearing more in the future publications. Shakhmuradyan, who is a researcher at the Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography in the Academy of Sciences of Armenia. Her research focuses are on desert kites and the emergence of writing in the Near East. She studied Near Eastern archaeology, Egyptology, and Assyriology in Yerevan State University, in St. Petersburg, and in Cambridge. And the topic of her PhD thesis relates to kites in Armenia, and this will be the topic of today as well. So, Mariam, the floor is yours. You can share your screen.
Everyone, thank you very much for invitation and also for attending this seminar. Today I will present the phenomenon of desert kites, mainly focusing on the desert kites of Armenia. Desert kites are the topic of my PhD thesis, which discusses the kites of all the regions, with the main focus on Armenian examples. I have been studying kites since 2017, nearly 5 years. First of all, some brief introduction about the kites. Kites are large-scale structures which usually have 2 or more long stone rows, which are kilometer longs. They have a large enclosure which is attached to the stone rows, and there are towers or cells, in other words, that are attached to the enclosure. And the most interesting feature of the kites is that their enclosures have different shapes, and that shapes are repeated in different territories. They are not dependent on the landscape. Here you can see some more examples of the forms of the enclosures, but they are numerous shapes. Kites have been first discovered in the deserts of Syria and Jordan in early 20th century by Royal Air Force pilots, and the name kite was given by one of the pilots, Lionel Rees, who saw similarity between the plan of the kites and the plan of the child toy kite, and that's why the name of these structures remains kites, because the exact function of these structures is still unknown, and that's why the name is not changed yet. Kites are distributed in the Middle Asia and Central Asia in nearly 10 countries, and currently their number reaches about 5,700, and as we can see, the Armenian examples are quite isolated. They are similar to the examples in Turkey and in northern Syria, and we do not know yet the reason of the isolation. Kites have been investigated nearly a century, and we have a lot of achievements since that period. Namely, we know the geographical distribution of the kites, we know the morphology, we know the patterns of the natural environment of the kites, and also the types of the structures which occur in the vicinity of the kites, but some fundamental issues still remain open. It is the function of the kites. It is the chronology on the local level. We know that kites have been used from the early Neolithic until the Middle Ages, but when we are looking at their chronology on the regional level, there are a lot of issues, and later I will explain the reason of that. And also we do not know about the society of the kites, and it comes from the issue of the chronology, because when we do not know the exact chronology, it is difficult to understand and the society who built the kites. And also we do not know about the ideological role that kites played in the life of the societies who built them. The reason that we have these fundamental issues is that kites are massive structures, and from this picture you can see that you can see on the right part a settlement, and you can see two kites which are thrice bigger than the settlement. And when we are doing excavations, they are mainly small-scale excavations, and they are unequal excavations in the regions. And this creates huge problems. And on the other hand, when we are doing excavations, there is a general lack of stratified finds, and because of that, it is difficult to attribute any of the findings to the kites itself. And that's why both the function and the dating of the kites remain controversial, because there is no direct archaeological data for these issues. Based on the context, for example, on the context when other structures are built on the kites, or vice versa, when kites are built on other structures, there is a now there is has been developed some model for the chronology, and preliminary model is that kites of the Central Asia in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan are dated from the Iron Age to the Middle Ages, and mainly to the Middle Ages based on the surface findings. The kites of Turkey and Jordan are dated to the early Neolithic period. In the Turkey, they are based on the archaeological landscape, no any excavations have been made, but in Jordan excavations have been made, and we have 4 or 5 radiometric dates and also context where we can say for sure that in Jordan they are dated to the early Neolithic, and in some places they were out of use in the late Neolithic period. In Syria, they have been dated from the Neolithic to the Bronze Age, and in Armenia, mainly Bronze Age and later periods, which we will discuss later. The function, there have been suggested several theories that kites could have been used as game drives, as corrals, as cultic buildings, and as fortresses. And today, none of the theories has gained common acceptance. The most widespread theory is that kites served as game drives for the herds of wild ungulates, especially gazelles. And here on the picture, you can see the model of the hunting, that gazelles were driven into the enclosure, and the cells have been used as hides or have been used as pit traps. Various researchers offered various models for the interpretation of the cells, and now most dominant version is that cells have been used as pit traps. The second theory is that kites could have been used for pastoralistic reasons, and the main argument is the petroglyph found in Safavi, Jordan, where there is a kite-like structure and there are goats or gazelles inside of the kite, and there is an inscription which says that this is the scene of pasturing gazelles and keeping them into the enclosure. And the third theory is that, which was put by myself, that kites could have been used could have symbolic function, because in the Nader Syria, in the Hema Plateau, which is located very close to the early Mesopotamian cities, have been found dozens of petroglyphs with the depictions of the kites, and in the depictions of the kites occur anthropomorphic figures with animals' heads or animal masks, and the depictions inside of the kites, they have similarities with the early Mesopotamian seals, where all these characters are interpreted as deities. And this is the third interpretation. Unfortunately, as today I'm going to present the desert kites of Armenia, I will not have time to focus on the theories and the arguments brought in favor of each series, but there are a lot of articles which can be found on the internet, and there are by most of the researchers, there are written articles where are brought a lot of arguments in favor of the hunting hypothesis, and there are also articles with counter arguments against the hunting hypothesis. And today the issue of the function remains controversial, because as I mentioned at the beginning, there is no any direct archaeological data. In the hunting traps of other regions, stratified accumulations of bones and dozens of broken weapons have been found, and we do not have this in the case of the kites. Now some information about the kites in Armenia. Kites are distributed on the south and southwestern slopes of Aragat Mountains, between the elevations of 500 meter and 2000 meter, but our statistics indicates that nearly 80% of kites are distributed at the elevations between 1000 and 1500 meters, excuse me, please. And kites occur only in Armavir and Aragazotan provinces, and only 2% of kites occur in Shirak province. And we do not have kites in other regions of Armenia. Kites have been discovered in Armenia in 2000 by Arkady Karakhanyan, who was working at the Institute of Geology, and then they started to be explored by Global Kites project by Armenian-French expedition within the framework of the Global Kites project. They have been studied also by Armenian-Israeli expedition, and from the 2018, the kites are investigated also by the expedition of the Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography of Armenia. Now I will present some examples of Armenian kites. Armenian kites, they have a classical structure that most of them have 2 stone rows. They have 2 stone rows, they have 1 large enclosure, and they have from 2 to 6, 7 towers in general. And they are characterized by diversity of the forms. You can see the crescent-shaped kite, and some of the forms is difficult to interpret or give any name because it is difficult to identify. Until now, the issue of the enclosure forms of the kites has not received any proper explanation. And regarding the surface area in Armenia, most of the kites have a surface area from 1 to 2 hectares, and the most large, the enclosures have surface area up to 7 hectares. In Armenia, most often occur rectangular shapes. Here you can see some examples, and they occur in numerous examples. Also, there are bag-like kites and also rounded shapes. Also occur triangular shapes, but it is difficult to say that they are triangular because from the pictures you can see that it is not a typical triangle. Some of them resemble arrows, and some of them have not been identified or assimilated to any other object in order to give a name. And there occur also shapes which do not fall in any of the category of geometric shapes. And sometimes in Armenia, kites occur in groups which can consist of up to 10 kites, and they can be connected to each other by their stone rows and other rows. And this is one of the best preserved complexes, Aragatsavan in Aragatsotan province, and our fieldwork has been mainly concentrated on this complex. Regarding the chronology of the kites in Armenia, the main work in this direction has been done by the Global Kites project, and we have only a few radiometric data. According to this data, one of the kites was used before the Middle Ages, 7th century AD. 2 of the kites have been used before the classical period. 1 kite has been used before the Iron Age, and 1 kite was used before the end of the 2nd millennia BC. And these are only radiometric dates from classical kites, but we have also dates from the V-shaped structures. It is these are structures which are quite similar to kites but do not have an enclosure, and these dates suggest terminal late Bronze Age. We conducted excavations in the Aragatsavan complex you can see the crescent shaped kites, and there is a settlement. The type of the settlement in literature is known as agglomerated cells. They often occur in the vicinity of kites, and recent research by the Global Kites project shows that kites and agglomerated cells in Armenia, they have the same distribution and they are related to each other. And inside of the tower of the kites, we do not find any objects except from one pottery piece which belonged to the medieval period, and it was in the upper part and in the field, while excavations of the agglomerated cells, here you can see more clear depiction of the crescent-shaped kite and the settlement. And during the settlement yielded a large quantity of pottery pieces, animal bones, most of which are domestic sheep or goats, and obsidian flakes, and the radiocarbon data obtained from the settlements indicates that it belongs to the Middle Bronze Age, end of the 3rd millennium, beginning of the 2nd millennium BC. We excavated also 2 other agglomerated cells in the vicinity of kites in the Tlik region, Tlik village of Armenia. One of the in the agglomerated cells have been found pits, a lot of pottery pieces, obsidian flakes in both of the agglomerated cells, and the radiometric data obtained from this type of settlements indicates that one of them was used in the Iron Age, and the second one was used again in the Middle Bronze Age. We excavated also last year. We excavated the cell of the kite in Tlik village, in the vicinity of Tlik village in Armenia, and for the first time in Armenia, the excavations of the cell yielded cultural layers along a stratigraphic sequence, and from the layers we found a lot of artifacts, which was quite surprising, because in the kites, nearly in most cases, we do not have cultural layers and findings included obsidian pieces, pottery pieces, which unfortunately are not diagnostic, and also wood pieces of the wood, and the soil of the cultural layers. Micromorphological analysis has been conducted in the Cambridge University at the McBurney laboratory, and the analysis indicates that in all the 3 layers we have 10% of plant issues, 5% of herbivore dung, and clay, and the difference, and in the last layer we have a burned clay, and the results of the micromorphological analysis indicate that sheep or goats in small quantity were kept for a short period inside of the cell of the kites, but we do not know the reason for this. Were they kept for killing? Were they kept in order to obtain secondary products as milk, or were they kept in order for sacrifice or any other activity? And the most surprising was that we have 2 radiocarbon data from the layers, which indicate that this kite was used in the late classical period and early medieval period. This was quite surprising when we considered the data from the agglomerated cells and data obtained from the Global Kites project. thus the chronology of kites in Armenia remains unsolved. Now the issue of the kites, issue of the function of the kites remains remains unsolved. Just some remarks that when we have excavated two enclosures of the kites, two walls of the enclosures of the kites, and they have height not higher than 1 meter. Two enclosures, they have 60-70 centimeters, which is quite low for the hunting of gazelles, because from the ethnographic data we know, from the ethnographic data in Jordan, we know that for the hunting of gazelles have been used walls which have height 1 meter, more than even reaching 2 meters, because gazelles can jump quite high. And also there are a lot of morphological problems from the point of view of hunting. For example, there are kites that have only one cell, and when we say, according to the hunting hypothesis, a herd of gazelles was hunted by kite, but if the herd of gazelles was hunted by the kites, one cell is clearly not enough for that, because it means because cell has a small sizes and it is not enough for the herd. On the other hand, from the drawings, you can see that the cells of the kites are sometimes blocked by the walls, which has not any explanation from the point of view of hunting, because according to this theory, animals should fall in the pits, but the way to the pits is blocked, and not only by a single wall, but sometimes by a double wall. And another thing is that towers or cells of the kites, they are located at low elevations, which means that they could not serve as heights for the hunters, because the hunters could not see what is happening in the enclosure, because the difference in the levels reaches 1 meter and sometimes even more. And also, when we are comparative analysis of the hunting structures in other parts of the world, and kites indicates that hunting structures in other parts of the world, they usually do not have enclosure. They have dozens of heights, and they have a lot of irregular walls. And most importantly, in the hunting structures of other regions, stratified bones and weapons were uncovered. But in contrast to it, kites have regular enclosures, and no accumulations of bones and stratified weapons was found inside of the kites. On the other hand, the data from the petroglyphs clearly indicates that kites have been embedded in the symbolic worlds of the societies who built them. And when we are when we are looking at these petroglyphs, quite often appear kites, empty kites, and hunting stands appear in the petroglyphs where there are not depictions of the kites. It means that if we have stands of hunting and we have depictions of the kites, and the hunting stands are not inside of the depictions of the kites, it creates problems from the point of view of hunting theory. And thus the issue still needs to be discussed. And also when I pay a great attention to the forms of the enclosures. As I say, the hunting structures usually they do not have an enclosure, and if they have, the enclosures are quite simple, while kites have enclosures that have diverse forms, and that forms usually resemble objects, based on which to the enclosures of the kites have been given names. For example, star-shaped, X-shaped, arrow-shaped, heart-shaped, and all of the forms have been assimilated to the objects. And if the forms of the kites, they resemble objects, and if they are repeated, it also, in my opinion, it also points to the symbolic use of the kites, and the interpretation of which can be done only if these forms will be identified with certain objects and their symbolic role. Thank you very much.
So, Franziska, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for this brilliant lecture. It's not a question, it's maybe more a comment. Coming back to the petroglyphs, I think it's quite usual to depict the hunting scene like that, because you don't have action, or it's a very basic level to present the hunt and what we have seen. So maybe you can just switch back 2 slides or something, because there's one depiction. Yeah, the one in the center up. So there is a kite with cells, and you have a human rider, and you have a dog, and you have the prey, so any 4-legged animals on the backside. So that would be how they could depict the hunting scene. Yeah, so you must imagine that that's not high level art, and you have a lot of yeah, no, it's more like it's a language. It's a language constructed of several signs and symbols, and bringing them together, you would have the perfect. You have the thing where it happens inside. You have the rider and with his dog, and you have the prey. And even the only thing I'm wondering is on the one up right, you have the kite inside big cat, leopard or something, don't know. And above it a goat. So I have no idea how to interpret. There are many, I know many scenes where snow leopards hunt ibexes. So that's a quite common topic. But in this case, you have the leopard who is captured inside the kite. Does it make any sense to hunt leopards with kites? Is there any evidence in literature? I don't know, in zoological experience. I don't know.
Thank you very much for your comments and questions. Regarding the petroglyph in the center, as I already mentioned, the petroglyphs of Hemma, they are located in the vicinity of early Mesopotamian cities, for example, Tel Beidar. They are quite close to the Tel Beidar. And from the Mesopotamian, when we are exploring the petroglyphs of Hemma, they have been found nearly 10,000 of petroglyphs, and the motifs on that petroglyphs have their parallels in the Mesopotamian iconography. And from the Mesopotamian early Mesopotamian iconography, we know that if you look attentively, the rider has a rope on its hands, and in early Mesopotamian, in Mesopotamian iconography, these riders are deities, and each deity is standing on its animal, and it can be Adad, it can be other animals, and they have a rope, and on the right side of it, I put another example, and based on these analogies with the Mesopotamian iconography, we know that this kind of riders are deities. Unfortunately, I did not put any examples here, but I can send examples regarding the lion or leopard and goat. From the point of view of hunting, it's difficult to explain, because because in natural contexts, lion and goat, they do not appear close to each other. But again, when we are looking at the Mesopotamian seals, we see a lot of mythological scenes where goat and lion appear close to each other. And to be honest, on the same, for example, one goat, the goat is in the upper part of the leopard, and it has its mythological interpretation, but I do not know that exact interpretation, but when you look at the seals you can see it. And regarding the other depictions, regarding the depictions of hunting and not inside of the kites, that depictions of hunting appear quite close to the depictions of to the petroglyphs with the depictions of the kites. That's why it creates some controversial parts.
Okay, thank you. No, it was just an idea because I know those seals, but I think this is another, how to say, another context. So you have those pastoralists and you have the mountainous people even there. So maybe first step will be to take it as what it is, and second step to think about another interpretation in the frame of high cultural Mesopotamian stylistic comparisons.
Thank you very much for your advice.
Okay.
Brava. I'm a Mesopotamian person, and you're right.
Great. So next question is from Pavol.
Yeah, it's actually more a comment than a question or some kind of contemplations about the dating, and and also kind of a call for caution by relating the settlements that are found close to the kites, so the agglomerated or the aggregated cells, as they are called, because their topographic proximity does not need to mean that they are from the same period. And so what my impression is, for looking at the dates of both of these types of structures, it looks like both of them have ranges. So they start sometime in the Neolithic period, they go until Middle Ages, depending in which region, of course. But and they remain for a long period visible on the surface. So I might imagine that, I imagine that part of our difficulties with dating it is also related to maybe reuse for different populations, from different populations for different purposes. So even if like the original purpose was something, then it might have been adapted as everything that was left behind for other purposes, when other people with other needs came in, maybe pastoralists, and before it was for hunt, they just adapted it, maybe took away some stones, maybe built some walls inside it. So this kind of reuse or readaptation is something that I wouldn't exclude. And especially this might explain why we have so many different dates from the structures. And by the way, now we also have one of the aggregated cells on Aragats, on Karmisar, which is a different date from the one which the French excavated on the plain. So our ones is 3rd millennium BC. So it also can be that we have to do with long living phenomena, that these were used for different population groups, maybe some which were specializing on pastoralisms, the other which were specializing on hunt. And we find them overlapped. Sometimes aggregated cells are on top of the kites, sometimes the kites are on the top of the aggregated cells. So this is something that we should take into account. This may be a much more complex picture than if it is treated like one phenomenon. Just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions or comments? Okay, if it's not the case, Thank you very much, Mariam, once again, and you can stop sharing the screen. So now just I would like to make the last comments and also address to all three presenters, speakers. Just a small question in order to start the discussion. So we have we have different features, different archaeological features, but more or less in the same kind of landscape. And of course, in regard of the landscape, it's already associated. But I wonder if there is another, like if one like petroglyphs can give a hint to understand the function of vishaps, or the other way around, or the same regarding the kites. I mean, you already touched upon several points. There were some examples, but all in all, I would address you as well as, let's say, the last discussion point. And starting maybe from Pavol, because you started the presentation. So what are your considerations about that?
Would be, of course, lovely if it would work like that. We were hoping that we find some petroglyph that will show us how the vishaps were used, or a kind of ritual taking place in front of a vishap. We found one vishap-shaped head, which was very close to our site, which is like 200 meters away from it. But we are not so really sure about who did it and why and when. This is very, very strange sign, and I hope that it was not done by someone who already know that we are working there. But it's packed, so it's they must have been very, very good in doing it. But no, there is no petroglyph that I would know that would give us a hint now for the vishaps, fortunately for the moment. Also not in the iconography. For example, vishaps have very specific eyes, which until now we don't find on any other category of finds, which would help us a lot in terms of also dating, if it is specific, and it seems it is. So not in this sense. For the kites and for the aggregated cells, this starts to be more interesting in relation with the vishaps, because it really seems that they share the same landscape as at least the aggregated cells. As Mariam showed, the kites do not go that high until now. They were not found in the really high altitudes. But the other type of structures, yes, so it's definitely has meaning to look on different aspects of the use of high mountains in different categories, look on the settlements, look at the pastoralism, look at the cultic use, like the vishaps and other stuff, sanctuaries that we find, or even the cemeteries, because if the people went there for a longer period, we should also find graves. Because until the 1960s, the people were burying their dead still then, until Impressionist era, it was then prohibited. So this is something which we can and we should really look at the complex level. Yes, I agree, Ruben.
Thank you very much. Franzi, maybe your observations, if you have some.
Yeah, I think you both are absolutely right. What we're doing right now, I think we just begun. If we compare this to other archaeological specializations, high altitude archaeology is serious now for about 10 years maybe. And not only in Transcaucasus, it's everywhere in the world. So if you go to Europe, it's the same. And we have quite a good knowledge right now of the surface. So everything we can survey, we can walk, we can ski is recorded right now, and we know the features, but we have no idea of the functions, or a very poor idea of the function. And I think what can help right now is to take a place where we have most of the features. So vishap, cromlechs or other burial settlements, petroglyphs, and then we need really, really big holes. So we have to excavate large scale. This will be the only thing to get a clear view out of it. It's always the same. So we see it here if we have the opportunity to excavate an open mine casting. We have hundreds of hectares, and then we start to understand how features belong together and how they date and where it was, which functions were fulfilled and so on. And I think this is still pending for high alpine archaeology as well in the Trans-Caucasus region. And this is why, yeah, congratulations, Pavol, to your DFG project. This might be or should be the first big step in that direction.
Okay, great. Congratulations also from my side. I didn't know. And finally, Mariam, your last comments, if you wish, of course.
Yes. I have more questions than the answers. Two main comments that we also need to consider another type of structures, which in literature are called wheel structures. And I think that in the case of I'm addressing my comment to Pavol. Dr. Arsen Bobokhyan shared with me the plan of the structure, which has been discovered in Garmirsand, and the plan of the structure more resembles the wheel structures. And we have also another wheel structure in Lernagert, which is being excavated by Dr. Benik Vartanyan. And in contrast to the agglomerated cells, which are located at the elevations on the same elevations and the kites, the two wheel structures are located at higher elevations. And this was the first comment. And the second comment is that for me, it is quite difficult to find any relationships between the petroglyphs and kites in Armenia because because observations indicate that in where are distributed the kites, there are not petroglyphs, and while in petroglyphs are located on higher elevations. And it is quite strange because in other regions in Jordan, the petroglyphs are located in close vicinity to the kites. And at this moment, I have not found any answer to this question. Thanks.
Thank you very much. You wanted to say something, Pavol?
Yeah, Ruben, if I can,
sure,
it just came to my mind that actually, just to make clear what my project is specializing on Aragat. So even if it is in the name, it has all Armenia, it's only for 3 years. So we can only do it in our small case study, which is on Karmirsar, and because it's diachronic. So we have their developments from the Chalcolithics until the modern era. And what I think is the potential of high mountains or high altitude archaeology is that it also can give us like a mirror for the plain, that there are some developments in the plain that we cannot really understand, or they are obscured if we are looking at them only from the plain, because there are too many possibilities open how to interpret them. One of them is, for example, the emergence of the vertical transhuman. When does it start? How does it influence the society? Was this always there, or have there been some periods where it was not practiced in high altitude? So this would have huge consequences for the people in the plain. This could really change the entire populations or their subsistence, and this really a lot of depends on that, whether or not the high altitude pastures are used. especially in the area like South Caucasus. Today, in Armenia, half of the land used for grazing the animals is in the high altitude. Just imagine what would happen if it is not available or if it is not used. The entire system would collapse. So either the people would not use pastoralism in this large scale, so they would only be farmers, or they would have only very limited animal husbandry in the vicinity of the settlements. And this is something which we maybe can correlate with the developments in the plain. There are some periods like the Kuro-Araks, which look very different from the periods like Chalcolithics on the Middle Bronze Age that look more mobile, more pastoralist. And we can look now from the high mountains, look what is happening there and try to correlate it with the developments in the plain. So this just an addition.
Okay, thank you very much. And if there are no further questions or comments, a huge thanks to the speakers for the very insightful presentations. And I don't want to finish without mentioning our image research competition. Deadline is 2nd of December. So send us snapshots of your of your research in South Caucasus. We will be very happy. And in light of the rising energy prices, we also even have cash prize to motivate people. So thank you very much. Also, thank you very much for staying with us till the end, and have a nice week.